On the screen, a faded teletype flash from the USS Maddox cuts through the dark. August 4th, 1964. Torpedoes in the water. That urgent military cable is superimposed directly over the black granite of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington. Now, cut to a declassified 2005 internal memo from the National Security Agency. It reads with cold, bureaucratic finality, "No attack happened that night. 58,000 American lives traded for a ghost." You need to understand the exact forensic anatomy of this deception. If you cannot see how electronic noise is laundered into political action, you will blindly accept the next fabricated casus belli. Your tax dollars, your future, and your lives are governed by signals intelligence. It is a shadowy stream of data that can be manipulated, misinterpreted, or outright ignored the very second it contradicts the desired narrative of those in power. Ignorance here is a lethal vulnerability. We are going to conduct a ruthless, zero-tolerance autopsy of the ultimate geopolitical fatal error. We will reconstruct the night of August 4th, minute by minute, pulling the evidence directly from the archives. We are cross-referencing classified deck logs, raw sonar acoustic data, and intercepted North Vietnamese radio traffic. We will track the paper trail of panic and bias from a storm-tossed destroyer all the way to the Oval Office. We are hunting for the glitch that started a war. Look closely at the heavy gold nib of a fountain pen pressing into official parchment. Black ink bleeds into the paper, cementing the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution into history. The camera pulls back, revealing the cavernous, polished floor of the United States Senate. We overlay the final tally in stark white numbers, 88-2. You are looking at the physical weight of a document that hands the president the absolute, unchecked legal authority to wage an unrestricted war. There is no formal declaration of war here, no constitutional debate, just a legislative blank check cashed in the blood of a generation. It is August 7th, 1964. Congress has officially passed Public Law 88-408. To an investigator, this is the ultimate crime scene. The entire geopolitical trajectory of the 20th century was radically altered by the strokes of this pen, functioning entirely on a foundation of compromised evidence. The resolution passed with terrifying speed. It was unanimous in the House of Representatives and faced only 2 dissenting votes in the Senate. The mandate authorized President Lyndon B. Johnson to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States. This was the airtight alibi for a decade of carpet bombing, chemical defoliation, and millions of casualties. It was a perfectly legal authorization built on a spectacularly flawed protocol. Every piece of legislation requires a foundational motive. The entire legal framework for the escalating Vietnam War rested on one incredibly specific, undeniable premise: that American naval vessels were the innocent victims of an unprovoked, deliberate strike on the high seas. Washington sold the narrative of a hostile foreign power ambushing American sailors in international waters. It is a compelling story, precisely engineered to bypass rational scrutiny and trigger absolute outrage. But when you strip away the patriotic rhetoric and examine the raw data, the official narrative begins to fracture. As an investigator reviewing the archives, you look for the discrepancy between the polished report and the messy, chaotic reality of the front line. You do not trust the unanimous votes or the presidential addresses. You trust the timestamps. You trust the decrypted intercepts and the radar telemetry. And the telemetry from that night tells a profoundly different story. We assume that the intelligence apparatus of a superpower operates with flawless precision. We believe that before a nation commits its youth to the meat grinder of a jungle war, every fact is verified, every radar blip is confirmed, and every translation is peer-reviewed. But the reality of espionage and military intelligence is a bureaucracy of paranoia. It is a system vulnerable to exhaustion, bias, and the desperate human desire to find patterns in meaningless electronic static. This is not merely a story about a mistaken coordinate or a faulty wire. It is a forensic breakdown of how an entire command chain fell victim to a shared digital hallucination. We are dissecting an event where the absence of evidence was somehow weaponized into the ultimate justification for violence. The ink on the resolution in the Senate chamber is dry, but the evidence that justified it was already dissolving into the humid air half a world away. The official record is a perjury. To unravel this colossal crime, we cannot stay in the sanitized, air-conditioned halls of Washington. We must rewind the tape. We need to roll the timeline back exactly 96 hours, stepping out of the Senate and into the suffocating darkness of a tropical storm. We are leaving the politicians behind and embedding ourselves with the radar operators and cryptologists who actually pulled the trigger on this catastrophe. We must return to the humid, treacherous waters of the Vietnamese coast. Down in the Combat Information Center of a destroyer, the sterile debates of Congress do not matter. There is only the sweeping green line of the radar and the paralyzing fear of the unknown. We are going to look over the shoulders of the men who stared into the electronic abyss and saw monsters that were not there. We will trace the exact moment when an atmospheric anomaly and a mistranslated word collided to create a fabricated reality. The anatomy of the lie starts at the console. The most terrifying aspect of the Tonkin incident is the sheer velocity of the deception. In less than a week, a phantom blip on an oscilloscope mutated into a geopolitical mandate. How does a piece of highly questionable, unverified combat data bypass every safeguard in the United States military infrastructure? How does an anomaly survive the scrutiny of the Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense, and the Commander-in-Chief, arriving at the Senate floor disguised as an absolute truth? A detective knows that when a piece of evidence is rushed through the chain of custody, someone is trying to hide the flaws. The administration did not want a thorough investigation of the August 4th incident. They wanted a casus belli. They needed a spark to ignite a powder keg they had already prepared. The radar ghosts provided the perfect, undeniable alibi to execute a war plan that had been sitting quietly in the desk drawers of the Pentagon, waiting for a righteous excuse. This brings us to the ultimate paradox of the August deception, the anomaly that haunts the archives to this day. The United States Senate voted for the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution based on a staggering, lethal lie that they genuinely didn't know was a lie. The intelligence was doctored long before it reached their desks. The question is not just what went wrong in the water. The question is, how do you convince an entire nation to go to war in less than 48 hours? How do you convince an entire nation to cross the threshold into total war in less than 48 hours? You do not start with a fabrication. A lie of that magnitude collapses under its own weight if it lacks a foundation. As an investigator reviewing the archives, I look for the underlying motive, the precedent. To successfully sell a massive, world-altering deception, you must first plant a seed of absolute, verifiable truth. Look at the declassified satellite cartography of the Gulf of Tonkin. We draw a digital red line across the water, marking the strict 12-mile international maritime boundary. Just outside this perimeter, a gray icon representing the USS Maddox zigzags provocatively along the coastline. It is the blinding daylight of August 2nd, 1964. The ship is not on a peaceful transit. It is deliberately scraping the edge of hostile territory. The official narrative paints the destroyer as an innocent vessel subjected to an unprovoked ambush. The deck logs tell a much more cynical story. The Maddox was executing Operation DESOTO, a highly classified signals intelligence patrol. Its primary objective was to deliberately trigger North Vietnamese coastal defense radars, record their electronic frequencies, and map the enemy's blind spots. The ship was serving as heavily armed bait. But the Maddox was not operating in a vacuum. Simultaneously, operating in the exact same waters, South Vietnamese commandos were executing O-Plan 34A. This was a brutal campaign of black operations, involving coordinated, high-speed maritime raids that physically attacked those very same North Vietnamese radar installations. Two separate, highly aggressive operations were overlapping in a severely constrained and volatile geographic choke point. Through the eyes of the destroyer's radar operator, the tactical situation is a tangled mess of overlapping signals and heightened alert states. The operator sits in the Combat Information Center, watching the green sweep of the screen, completely aware that friendly commandos are actively blowing up the coastline just over the horizon. The tension in the compartment is thick enough to choke on. They are waiting for the inevitable retaliation. On the afternoon of August 2nd, the retaliation arrives. 3 distinct, fast-moving blips appear on the extreme edge of the radar scope. They are North Vietnamese P-4 torpedo boats accelerating to attack speed. The enemy commanders are looking at the Maddox and making a fatal, tactical miscalculation. They assume this massive American warship is the command center coordinating the coastal commando raids that are currently burning their shores. This is not a glitch. This is not atmospheric noise or a miscalibrated instrument. The operator tracks the 3 incoming vectors, measuring their speed and intercept angle. The threat is physical, undeniable, and closing rapidly. The alarm sounds, stripping away any pretense of a routine patrol. The crew scrambles to battle stations, the steel decks vibrating as the ship's massive engines push to maximum defensive velocity. The ensuing engagement is violently real, confirmed by multiple daylight visual sightings from the bridge and surrounding aircraft. The Maddox does not hesitate. The destroyer opens up with its main batteries, unleashing a devastating barrage. Over the course of the skirmish, the American crew fires over 285-inch shells. The concussive shockwaves of the naval guns shatter the humid afternoon air. The exchange of fire leaves a permanent psychological scar on the crew. One of the North Vietnamese torpedo boats is severely damaged, left dead in the water and trailing thick black smoke. The other 2 are driven off by strafing runs from carrier-based aircraft. The smell of burning cordite floods the ventilation systems of the Maddox. The men on board have just survived a genuine, lethal encounter. The blood is in the water. This verified firefight is the critical piece of evidence needed to understand the ensuing disaster. It establishes the baseline of truth. When the guns finally fall silent on August 2nd, the psychological architecture of the crew has been fundamentally rewired. They are no longer observers on a reconnaissance mission. They are combatants who've been fired upon. The adrenaline spike leaves them in a state of hyper-vigilance. A forensic profiler will tell you that trauma fundamentally alters perception. The radar operator, staring at his scope after the battle, is no longer looking for anomalies. He is expecting the next wave. Every shadow on the horizon, every flicker of the equipment, is now filtered through the very real memory of high-speed torpedo boats. The entire ship is placed on maximum alert, locked in a claustrophobic state of extreme paranoia. This is the exact mechanism of how a lie is engineered. You do not fabricate an attack out of thin air. You take a real, terrifying event, let the fear marinate in the minds of the operators, and then you wait for the environment to provide the next trigger. The phantom incident of August 4th would never have been believed by anyone if the skirmish of August 2nd had not physically rattled the teeth of the men watching the screens. The real battle laid the groundwork for the fake one. Washington now had a documented, undeniable record of North Vietnamese aggression. The narrative of the unprovoked ambush was written and ready to be deployed. All the intelligence community needed now was a second data point, no matter how flawed, to justify dropping the hammer. The trap was set, waiting only for a dark night, a violent storm, and a fatal misinterpretation of the radar. The trap was set, and the environment delivered the executioner. 48 hours after the confirmed firefight, on the night of August 4th, the weather violently turns. The USS Maddox, now joined on patrol by the destroyer USS Turner Joy, sails directly into a massive tropical thunderstorm. Visibility drops to absolute zero. The visual baseline of the battlefield is entirely erased by driving rain and towering ocean swells. Step inside the Combat Information Center of the Maddox. It is a suffocating, windowless steel vault bathed in harsh, red tactical lighting. The deck pitches violently underfoot, throwing men against the bulkheads. The air conditioning struggles against the stifling tropical heat, mixing the smell of stale sweat with the sharp, metallic tang of ozone from the equipment. This is the claustrophobic epicenter of our crime scene. Look at the primary witness, the radar operator. He is strapped into a chair, fighting seasickness and profound sleep deprivation. His eyes are locked onto the hypnotic, sweeping green glow of the scope. What happens when you take a traumatized crew, fresh out of a lethal firefight, and lock them in a pitch-black box with early-generation vacuum tube radar technology? You strip away their ability to verify physical reality. As an investigator reviewing the deck logs, I see a textbook recipe for a psychological and technological disaster. The men on that ship have lost their primary sensory input, their eyesight. They are entirely reliant on the bouncing electromagnetic pulses of the ship's sensors. The machine has become their only connection to the outside world, and they trust its glowing green phosphor line with their absolute survival. Then, the anomaly registers. At approximately 2100 hours local time, the sweeping line illuminates a cluster of sudden, erratic white blobs. The operator stares at the screen, watching the phosphor fade and return with each rotation of the antenna. The protocol demands an immediate classification. In the rigid terminology of naval warfare, these unidentified surface contacts are officially designated as skunks. The operator tracks the skunks. They are not drifting with the violent current. They are closing the distance to the American destroyers at incredibly high speeds. The data points plot a deliberate, aggressive intercept course. Through the lens of a crew that was shot at just 2 days prior, this is not an anomaly. This is the confirmation of their worst fear. The North Vietnamese have returned under the cover of the storm. General quarters is sounded. Alarms scream through the decks of the Maddox and the Turner Joy. Men scramble to their battle stations in the pitch black, loading the 5-inch guns, preparing to fire blindly into the hurricane. The evidence on the screen is treated as absolute, undeniable fact. But when we audit the physics of the environment, the official narrative completely collapses under the weight of meteorological data. The radar operator is trusting a machine that is utterly blind to the chaos of the atmosphere. The radar system on a 1960s destroyer was designed to detect solid steel hulls, not to interpret the complex thermodynamics of a tropical hurricane. The extreme weather outside is actively sabotaging the electromagnetic spectrum, creating a highly specific, localized anomaly that the military protocol failed to account for. Meteorologists refer to this physical phenomenon as a temperature inversion. The violent storm creates colliding layers of radically different air temperatures. Instead of traveling straight out toward the horizon, the radar pulses emitted by the Maddox hit this atmospheric boundary and are violently bent. The signal is pushed downward, trapped between the dense, humid air and the violently churning surface of the dark ocean. This trapped energy has nowhere to go but down. The electromagnetic waves crash directly into the crests of the massive, turbulent swells generated by the storm. The ocean's surface acts like a chaotic mirror, reflecting the radar pulses straight back to the ship's receiver. The primitive analog computer inside the combat center processes this returning energy exactly as it was programmed to do. It registers a solid, moving mass. The system plots a target. As the waves rise and fall, the targets seem to maneuver, appearing, disappearing, and accelerating at impossible speeds. These are the infamous Tonkin ghosts. The machine is functioning exactly as engineered, but the data it produces is a complete fabrication. The operator is not tracking an ambush. He is tracking the electronic echo of the storm itself, weaponized by his own scanning equipment. The raw evidence proves that the radar was lying. The sweeping electromagnetic waves were painting a hyper-realistic, terrifying picture of an enemy armada that simply did not exist. There were no torpedo boats stalking the American destroyers in the dark. There was only weather, bad technology, and a crew primed by trauma to see murderers in the static. Yet this digital hallucination was recorded in the official deck logs. This is the exact moment the timeline fractures. A localized technological glitch, born from ocean swells and temperature inversions, becomes an official military record of an unprovoked attack. The false data points are about to leave the suffocating darkness of the combat center and travel up the chain of command. The ghost on the screen is about to be intercepted, packaged, and sold to the highest levels of the government. The ghost on the screen is about to be intercepted, packaged, and sold to the highest levels of the government. But a radar malfunction in a tropical storm is just an occupational hazard. Equipment fails. Sailors panic. That alone does not start a decade-long war. To turn a localized mechanical glitch into a geopolitical catastrophe, you need something much more potent than bad weather. You need institutional confirmation. You need the paperwork of a legitimate threat. We are leaving the suffocating darkness of the Gulf of Tonkin. Thousands of miles away, deep inside the subterranean listening posts at Fort Meade, the environment is clinically sterile. Flickering oscilloscope screens and buzzing fluorescent lights illuminate mountains of decrypted teletype paper. To the signals intelligence analyst on the night shift, the ocean storm does not exist. There is only the dry, cynical reality of intercepted radio traffic. Radar glitches happen every day across the global fleet. But what elevated this specific glitch into an unstoppable war machine was a catastrophic failure in translation by the most advanced intelligence agency in the world. The analyst is looking for a pattern, a paper trail that matches the frantic distress calls coming from the destroyer. And in the chaotic stream of intercepted North Vietnamese communications, he finds exactly what he is looking for. While the ships in the Pacific were chasing radar ghosts, the National Security Agency intercepted a piece of North Vietnamese military communication. On paper, it is just a string of encrypted characters, but to the cryptologist, it is the smoking gun. It is the hard evidence required to validate the panic on the water. The intercept is decoded and passed up the chain. It seems to describe an active, lethal engagement happening at that exact moment. The entire justification for 58,000 American casualties hinges on a single sentence. The original Vietnamese phrase, Chúng tôi đang hy sinh đồng chí, crosses the desk. Washington translates this directly as, we sacrificed 2 comrades. In the tense atmosphere of the control room, this is interpreted as a real-time combat report. They assume the North Vietnamese are currently taking losses while assaulting the American destroyers in the dark.
This is where the investigation finds the corpse. When you follow the paper trail, you realize the evidence was completely fabricated by human error. The translation was not just sloppy, it was a fatal misreading of context. The analyst forces the data to fit the narrative of an ongoing ambush. He holds a piece of paper that seemingly corroborates the erratic radar returns, but he is entirely blind to the timeline of the actual physical events.
A correct translation of the historical archives proves a much darker reality. This intercept was not a live broadcast of a new attack. It was a delayed damage report referring strictly to the real skirmish from 2 days earlier, on August 2nd. The North Vietnamese command was simply assessing the casualties from the daylight firefight we already tracked. It was an administrative memo, delayed by the slow bureaucratic gears of their military network. A mundane post-action report is intercepted at the exact moment the American destroyers are battling weather anomalies. The timing is a mathematically improbable disaster. The cryptologist at Fort Meade does not see a delayed memo. He sees a live confession. He takes a piece of historical data and forcefully grafts it onto a present-day hallucination. The paper trail is corrupted. The intelligence protocol has failed at its most fundamental level.
This is how history is hijacked. A typo becomes a torpedo.
If this scale of institutional deception blows your mind, hit the like button. To make sure you do not miss the ultimate solution to this mystery, subscribe to the channel. Do you think the analysts knew they were making a mistake, or were they just victims of panic? Let me know in the comments. Because uncovering the anatomy of this lie is the only way to protect ourselves from the next one. The National Security Agency analysts merge the old intercept with the live radar anomalies. They create a deadly, self-sustaining illusion. By fusing a 48-hour-old damage report with real-time electronic noise, they believe they have signal intelligence confirming an active attack. They have manufactured a crisis out of thin air. The machine is feeding the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy is feeding the machine, locking them into a closed loop of paranoia.
Through the eyes of the analyst, the puzzle pieces snap together perfectly.
The destroyer reports incoming targets. The intercept reports combat casualties. It is a textbook confirmation, but in reality, it is the highest form of confirmation bias. The analyst stops questioning the data because the data tells him exactly what he expects to hear. He strips away the nuance of the language and replaces it with the terrifying certainty of a predefined threat.
In any forensic investigation, you look for the moment the alibi falls apart. Here, the alibi is destroyed by a simple timestamp. The intelligence community took a ghost from the past and used it to arm a ghost in the present.
They built a bridge of false logic between the stormy waters of the Pacific and the sanitized corridors of Washington. They weaponized a clerical error, transforming a routine administrative update into a formal declaration of hostility. The decoded message is stripped of its original context and packaged as urgent tactical intelligence. It is no longer a mistranslated phrase. It is an undeniable fact. This piece of teletype paper is the catalyst that will turn a localized panic into a geopolitical mandate. The cryptologists at Fort Meade have unwittingly forged the signature on a death warrant. They have provided the empirical evidence that the political apparatus is desperately waiting for. Once that translated intercept leaves the subterranean bunker, it cannot be recalled. The raw, flawed data is now classified intelligence. It is immune to skepticism. It is insulated from the chaotic, messy reality of the thunderstorm currently battering the destroyers. The error is locked into the official record. The system has decided that an attack is happening, and no amount of physical evidence to the contrary will be allowed to stop the machinery of war. We have the motive, and we have the fabricated paperwork. The intelligence failure is complete. The false signal has been sent. But to understand the true horror of this night, we must take this corrupted data and inject it back into the terrified crew on the water. We must see what happens when the men in the dark are told that the ghosts on their screens are real, armed, and coming to kill them. The bureaucratic error is about to become a fight for survival. The bureaucratic error at Fort Meade has mutated into a fight for survival. To the men in the Combat Information Center of the USS Maddox, the flawed intelligence from Washington is absolute reality. The abstract data stream is suddenly replaced by the blinding, claustrophobic terror of a pitch-black ocean. The storm is raging outside the hull, but the true nightmare is unfolding inside the cramped, red-lit confines of the sonar room. Through the ears of the sonar operator, the ocean is a symphony of lethal threats. He presses his heavy headphones tight against his skull, desperately trying to filter the crash of the waves from the distinct, high-pitched mechanical whine of an incoming weapon. If the radar ghosts were purely an atmospheric illusion, we face a chilling forensic paradox. What exact acoustic signature triggered the frantic scream of a torpedo in the water? Over the course of 4 grueling hours in the dark, the Maddox logs a staggering sequence of evasive maneuvers. The official deck logs record the crew dodging an impossible 22 enemy torpedoes. In the claustrophobic steel box of the combat center, every reported contact ratchets the panic higher. They are throwing a massive warship into violent, sickening turns to avoid weapons that simply do not exist. But the operator is genuinely hearing something. In any forensic audit, you look for a control sample to verify the corrupted data. Our control sample is the USS Turner Joy, a destroyer sailing right alongside the Maddox in the exact same extreme weather conditions. While the sonar man on the Maddox is screaming out multiple incoming tracks, the acoustic equipment on the Turner Joy registers 0 torpedo signatures. Complete silence. The deadly swarm of projectiles is entirely localized to a single set of headphones. We must treat this discrepancy as a mechanical crime scene. 2 sophisticated naval platforms, sharing the same grid coordinate, generating completely contradictory intelligence. The operator on the Maddox is not lying. His physiological responses are spiked by genuine terror. He is locked in a feedback loop, processing raw audio data that his brain, primed by the real attack 2 days prior, immediately categorizes as an imminent and lethal strike. To find the source of the phantom acoustics, we have to examine the physical behavior of the destroyer itself.
Every time the radar picked up a false weather anomaly, the captain ordered a hard, high-speed evasive turn. The kinetic energy required to violently rip a 2,000-ton steel hull through storm-tossed swells is immense. These maneuvers tear the ocean apart, creating a massive zone of underwater acoustic chaos right beneath the stern. Sonar operates on a simple principle of acoustic reflection, but it requires a clean environment to function accurately. When the Maddox executes these extreme high-speed banks, the massive brass propellers do not just push water, they cavitate. They boil the ocean at the blade edges, creating a violent wake of crushing pressure and exploding microbubbles. This localized underwater turbulence is absolutely deafening to the ship's own acoustic sensors. A rigorous post-incident acoustic analysis later revealed the fatal engineering flaw at the heart of the panic. The sonar men were not intercepting the mechanical whine of Soviet-built torpedoes closing in for the kill. They were intercepting the acoustic reflection of their own ship. Every time the Maddox threw its rudder hard over to dodge a phantom radar blip, the violent beating of the propeller against the turbulent water echoed straight back into the sonar array. It is a flawlessly engineered psychological and mechanical trap. The radar operator sees a weather glitch and calls a surface contact. The captain orders a hard turn to evade. The turn creates violent propeller turbulence. The sonar operator hears the turbulence, misinterprets the rhythmic swishing as an incoming weapon, and confirms the attack. The confirmation forces another evasive turn, which creates another acoustic signature. The ship is literally chasing its own tail. Under the crushing pressure of combat fatigue, basic operational logic simply evaporates. The crew is essentially blindfolded, relying entirely on instruments that are actively feeding them a manufactured reality. The intelligence failure here is not just a glitch in the hardware. It is the complete collapse of human analytical capability. The hardware generated the noise, but human fear sculpted that random noise into an armada of invisible assassins. You are observing a system that has completely lost its grip on objective reality. The empirical evidence proves there were no enemy boats within miles of the task force that night. The 22 torpedoes were nothing more than acoustic shadows, generated by the defensive maneuvers of a crew terrified of ghosts. Yet these shadows are being meticulously logged, time-stamped, and transmitted back to Washington as hard, actionable combat data. We are watching a microscopic physical anomaly mutate into a geopolitical weapon. The sonar operator's terrified report is the final piece of evidence the administration needs. It provides the crucial, fatal cross-verification to the flawed intercepts generated by the intelligence agency. The illusion is now completely bulletproof. A misread echo in the dark ocean is about to cross the desk of the commander-in-chief as an undeniable act of war. The men in the Combat Information Center believe they have just survived the naval engagement of the decade. They are completely unaware that the real war is being engineered thousands of miles away in a brightly lit office where raw panic is about to be refined into foreign policy. The data has permanently left the ocean. It is now in the hands of the bureaucrats, and the momentum of this monumental lie is finally unstoppable. The data has permanently left the chaotic, rain-slicked decks of the Pacific. It is now August 4th, 1964, 1:27 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Inside the Oval Office, the air is sterilized, heavy with air conditioning and the relentless mechanical clatter of the teletype machine. The raw panic of the ocean has been reduced to neat uppercase letters on encrypted paper. But within this paper trail lies a massive, irreconcilable contradiction.
You are looking at a crime scene constructed not with bullets, but with bureaucracy. The intelligence protocol dictates that the commander-in-chief makes decisions based on the most accurate, updated tactical assessment. Yet, the archival evidence reveals a transaction that is theoretically impossible. The military machine is preparing for a massive retaliatory strike based on an attack that the commanding officer on the ground has already explicitly denied. This is the central paradox of the August deception. The commander of the destroyer task force realized the fatal error of the sonar and radar operators. He documented the mistake and sent a desperate, high-priority cable to halt the escalation. The message was received, decrypted, and logged in Washington. So why did the architects of American defense policy completely ignore the man standing on the front line? You have to follow the flow of information to find the filter.
Let us examine the exact evidence. At 1:27 p.m., Captain John Herrick, the senior officer overseeing the USS Maddox and Turner Joy, initiated a frantic flash message directly to Pacific Command and Washington. His exact words, preserved in the declassified naval archives, are a stark repudiation of everything reported earlier. Review of action makes many reported contacts and torpedoes fired appear doubtful. He is literally attempting to pull the emergency brake. Herrick does not stop at mere doubt. He meticulously profiles the source of the false data. His cable continues, explicitly citing freak weather effects on radar and overeager sonar men as the likely culprits for the Phantom Armada. The investigator on the ground has successfully diagnosed the technological hallucination we analyzed earlier. He understands that his crew is reacting to ghosts, and he puts that forensic conclusion into the official military record. To ensure there is zero ambiguity, Captain Herrick concludes his flash message with a definitive operational directive. He formally recommends complete evaluation before any further action taken. This is his alibi, permanently stamped in the archive. He is telling the Pentagon, in the clearest military terminology possible, that the pretext for war is built on severely compromised data and demands immediate suspension of all retaliatory protocols. But raw data does not simply walk into the Oval Office. It is escorted, filtered, and curated. The primary gatekeeper of this intelligence is Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. He stands over the desk, physically holding the cables from the Pacific. In a massive bureaucratic hierarchy, the Secretary of Defense possesses the ultimate editorial control over what the President sees. He is the bottleneck where complex, contradictory reality is distilled into actionable policy. The paper trail exposes the deliberate mechanics of the deception. McNamara reads Herrick's retraction. He sees the explicit warning about overeager sonar men and freak weather. And then, he commits a monumental act of omission. When McNamara briefs President Lyndon B. Johnson, he completely suppresses Herrick's secondary cable. He presents only the initial intercepts and the terrified, uncorrected panic reports. He builds a case using strictly the evidence that supports retaliation. To understand the omission, you must understand the motive. This was not a clerical error. It was a highly calculated, strategic maneuver. Declassified internal memos from early 1964 reveal that the administration had already drafted plans for a massive escalation against North Vietnam. They possessed the strategy, the bombers, and the political will. What they lacked was a legally justifiable pretext. They needed an unprovoked attack to sell the war to the Senate. The administration took the chaotic, flawed noise of the early warning system and surgically weaponized it. They did not invent the radar ghosts in the Gulf of Tonkin,
but they recognized a profound political opportunity when the faulty data arrived. By actively silencing the commander's doubts, they transformed a tragic chain of technological misreads into an absolute, unquestionable certainty. They engineered a truth that fit their pre-existing operational requirements. The clock in the Oval Office ticks relentlessly toward midnight. The machinery of war requires momentum, and McNamara has successfully removed the only obstacle in its path. By feeding the president a sanitized, entirely fabricated version of the night's events, the Secretary of Defense secures the authorization for immediate airstrikes. The hesitation of the naval commander is buried under the overwhelming, artificially constructed consensus of the intelligence briefing. This is how the lethal injection of false intelligence enters the bloodstream of a superpower. The administration did not just fail to prevent a mistake, they actively protected the mistake from being corrected. They hijacked the ambiguity of the ocean and converted it into the rigid certainty of a retaliatory bombing campaign. The narrative is no longer about what actually happened on the water. It is entirely about what Washington needs to have happened to justify its next move.
As the telegraph lines transmit the execution orders to the aircraft carriers in the Pacific, the immediate tactical deception is complete. A non-existent attack has successfully triggered a very real, devastating kinetic response. But the forensic footprint of this lie remains in the archives. The intercepted cables, the suppressed warnings, the true timeline. They are all sitting in the vaults of the intelligence community, waiting for a cover-up of unprecedented proportions. The bombs fell, the war machine roared to life, and the immediate tactical deception achieved its goal. But crimes of this magnitude always leave a paper trail. As the telegraph lines transmitted execution orders across the Pacific, a different kind of operation began back in Washington. This was the silent, sterile work of the bureaucracy, meticulously burying the forensic footprint of their fatal error deep inside a classified vault. We step out of the chaos of the Oval Office and into the claustrophobic silence of a government archive. The air here smells of decaying paper and institutional paranoia. An investigator pulls a manila folder stamped with the highest classification level, Top Secret Umbra. Inside are paragraphs suffocated by heavy black redaction lines. This is the anatomy of a cover-up, frozen in time and hidden from public scrutiny. You might look at the catastrophic misreads of August 4th and see a tragic accident born of panic and bad weather. But the most terrifying part of this timeline is not that a mistake was made in the heat of a storm. The true horror is that the intelligence apparatus realized their fatal error within a matter of days. And instead of pulling the emergency brake, they chose to spend the next 40 years hiding the truth from you. Through the eyes of an NSA signals intelligence analyst, reviewing the raw data after the fact, the discrepancy is glaring. The math simply does not add up. The incoming signals do not match the outgoing policy. But, in the architecture of military intelligence, admitting a failure that just triggered a global conflict is institutional suicide. The instinct is not to correct the record, but to sanitize it. The anomaly must be erased. The lid stayed tightly sealed on this vault until the year 2001. That is when an internal NSA historian named Robert J. Hanyuk concluded an exhaustive, highly classified review of the original Tonkin intercepts. He did not rely on the political summaries handed to the president. He went straight to the raw, unedited signals data. And what he found there dismantled the entire justification for a decade of bloodshed. Hanyuk's investigation proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the intelligence presented to the White House was fatally skewed. The narrative of an unprovoked, deliberate attack on the high seas was entirely unsupported by the physical evidence. The signals intelligence analyst looking at the historical record sees a deliberate manipulation of the timeline. The facts were bent to fit the exact shape of the desired retaliation. This was not merely a case of passive omission or confirmation bias. Hanyek's explosive report detailed a precise, bureaucratic crime. Mid-level NSA officials had deliberately falsified the timeline of the intercepted North Vietnamese messages. They took intercepts from the confirmed August 2nd skirmish and intentionally altered the timestamps, shifting them to August 4th to manufacture the illusion of a second active engagement. By altering those timestamps, the analysts effectively created a ghost fleet out of thin air. They took a delayed damage report from a past event and dressed it up as a live battle network. This is the ultimate betrayal of the cryptologist's oath. The very people tasked with providing an objective mirror of reality to the commander-in-chief had instead shattered the mirror, taping the shards together to reflect a fabricated enemy strike. Follow the data trail with me, and the motive becomes coldly apparent. I have spent years analyzing these intelligence failures, and the pattern is always the same. The agency was caught in a lethal trap of their own making. Having initially confirmed the phantom attack in the chaos of the moment, retracting that confirmation at dawn would have exposed them to devastating political fallout. So they doubled down on the deception. Even after Hanyek laid this damning evidence bare in 2001, the cover-up continued. The NSA leadership flatly refused to declassify his findings. They kept the report buried in a secure vault for another 4 agonizing years. The delay had nothing to do with protecting active intelligence sources or national security. The motivation for suppressing the truth was purely optical, driven by a new, unfolding geopolitical crisis. The year was 2003, and a new administration was aggressively selling another war based on highly questionable intelligence. Releasing a rigorously documented report proving the NSA had previously manufactured a casus belli in Vietnam would have drawn catastrophic, uncomfortable parallels. The agency prioritized protecting its current credibility over exposing its historical crimes. The truth was held hostage by the present. When the black redaction lines finally faded and the documents were exposed to the light of day, the absolute emptiness of the August 4th narrative was undeniable. The truth was entombed in those archives all along. Out of the hundreds of intercepted North Vietnamese communications recorded that entire night, not a single one referenced an attack on American ships. There were no orders to fire. There was no enemy coordination. The radio waves over the Gulf of Tonkin on that fatal night were filled with standard patrol chatter and weather reports. The enemy was completely unaware that a phantom battle was raging on the American radar screens. The entire engagement was a closed-loop hallucination, occurring entirely within the terrified minds of the destroyer crew and the manipulated spreadsheets of the intelligence bureaucracy. The ocean was completely empty. This is the anatomy of a manufactured reality. The physical evidence, the lack of acoustic hits, the pristine radio silence of the adversary, was methodically stripped away. What remained was a heavily curated, heavily redacted dossier designed to trigger a specific geopolitical outcome. The system did not fail because it was broken. It failed because it functioned exactly as the political operators required it to in that specific moment. You are looking at a bureaucratic crime scene where the weapon was a typewriter and the casualty was the truth. 58,000 American names would eventually be carved into a black granite wall,
because a handful of officials decided that admitting a mistake was more dangerous than starting a war. The archive proves that the deadliest lies are not shouted on the battlefield. They are quietly filed away in classified folders. The classified folders of the National Security Agency are finally open, and the ink on the Vietnam casualty lists has been dry for decades. Today, the waters of the Gulf of Tonkin are perfectly still, an empty expanse of dark ocean reflecting the night sky. The analog machines that lied to us in 1964 have long since rusted away into absolute irrelevance. But as I look at the modern operational interfaces, the cascading lines of code and live data streams of today's digital battlefield, I realize the most terrifying part of this investigation. The mechanics of deception did not disappear when the Cold War ended. They were simply upgraded. The vulnerability to systemic bias and political manipulation remains hardwired into our world. We began this inquiry looking for a phantom ship, trying to understand how a single radar glitch could dictate the fate of a nation. What we uncovered is a much darker, much more permanent architectural flaw in how empires justify violence. We discovered that war is rarely born from an unprovoked strike. It is engineered through the calculated exploitation of human panic. As an investigator, looking at the full timeline of the August deception, the final verdict is undeniable. The Gulf of Tonkin is a closed case file. We found the mechanism, and we exposed the motive. The system took the random, chaotic noise of an ocean storm and weaponized it, completely bypassing the operational doubts of the very commanders who were supposedly under fire. The irrefutable conclusion of this case is that military intelligence is never an objective mirror of reality. It is a highly subjective human construct. The raw data is entirely susceptible to the immediate political desires of those who hold the power to interpret it. When the establishment needs a pretext for escalation, it will extract it from the static of the universe. In 1964, it took days of frantic teletype messages, sweating cryptologists, and deliberate misinterpretations of atmospheric temperature inversions to successfully manufacture a war. It was a manual, agonizingly slow process of bureaucratic deceit. But the ghost in the machine has not been exorcised. It has merely evolved to match the velocity of modern warfare. Today, our security infrastructure is dominated by algorithmic signal processing, synthetic media generation, and automated threat detection platforms. We have surrendered the burden of verification to neural networks and artificial intelligence systems that operate entirely within a black box. The mathematical complexity is staggering, but the underlying danger is exactly the same. The crucial difference is time. The distance between a false positive anomaly on a sensory array and an automated kinetic military strike has shrunk from a matter of hours to mere milliseconds. We have built an international security apparatus where the sheer volume and speed of incoming data completely outpaces the speed of human verification and rational geopolitical analysis. You are living in a reality where the speed of light is the only speed limit. Your physical safety, your economy, and your future are completely dependent on the integrity of digital signals that you will never see. If an analog radar glitch and a mistranslated radio intercept could kill 58,000 people in 1964, consider what is possible right now. What kind of catastrophic global escalation could a manufactured digital hallucination trigger today? The next casus belli will not be a phantom destroyer bouncing on the glowing green sweep of a vacuum tube radar scope. It will be an injected string of corrupted metadata, a flawlessly synthesized deepfake of a foreign leader, or an engineered algorithmic market panic.
And the history of the Tonkin matrix guarantees one absolute certainty.
When the digital mistake is inevitably made, the institution will always protect itself first. They will classify the error to preserve their authority. By the time the truth is finally declassified and released to the public 40 years later, the radioactive ash will have settled, and the damage will be irreversible.
The trail of the 1964 deception went cold for decades because the public simply trusted the machine.
To prevent the next fabricated crisis from burning down our world, you have to understand the fundamental architecture of the lie. You must interrogate the data, question the intelligence narratives, and demand absolute transparency before the first missile leaves the silo.
We have closed the file on the Tonkin deception, but the investigation into how reality is manufactured continues.
If this forensic breakdown gave you a new perspective on the mechanics of war, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I want you to drop your verdict in the comments. Are we more vulnerable to a false flag hallucination today than we were in the 60s?
The ultimate lesson of the Ghost Fleet is that a society unwilling to ruthlessly audit its own intelligence is a society preparing to bleed for a lie.
The ocean is empty, the radar screens are dark, but the machinery of deception is still humming quietly in the background, waiting for the next storm. The case is closed, but the watch continues. Signing off.